Today's Bite Size looks to ask a game-related question. Why is a roguelike called a roguelike? The words roguelike seem more and more common today than they did just a few years ago. We've gone from an era where roguelikes were few and far between to a place where roguelikes have carved out their own ever-expanding category. But when you look at other game genres, platformer, racing, puzzle, action, strategy, casual, adventure, the defining word is usually a literal explanation of the game style. Unless you take a tag like indie, of course, which could mean anything, really. So, why roguelike? Well, the meaning of rogue is usually associated with a dishonest scoundrel, a rascal, or if you want to take the comic book line, a character with involuntary ability to absorb mental and physical characteristics from whatever she touches. But when we talk about roguelikes, it pretty much goes back to this single game. This is Rogue, created in 1980 by Michael Troy and Glenn Wichman on a college Unix system. The premise of Rogue is quite simple. You take an overhead view of a dungeon created using ASCII characters, starting in the uppermost chamber. Your goal is to fight your way to the bottom level, retrieve the Amulet of Yendor, which spells Rodney backwards, and then ascend to the surface. The game was influenced by the mainframe text game Colossal Cave Adventure, as well as the classic tabletop RPG Dungeons and Dragons. The game was later ported to various systems, including this version on the IBM PC, as well as Commodore 64, Spectrum, and even Amiga and Atari ST, although with slightly improved graphics. Anyway, there seem to be some main characteristics of the game which are worth noting. The first is that the levels are procedurally generated, resulting in different experiences on each play. The second is the overhead perspective. The third is the fantasy dungeon setting and unmapped fog of war style levels, which require you to crawl through and find your path. The fourth are the RPG elements, which is indeed also a separate genre in itself, and these are based around evolving and changing character attributes and progression. The fifth is the realism aspect of being permanently dead when you die, until you start a new game at least. Now these key elements will alone go on to form the entire genre that is the roguelike, hence the name, but you already knew that. The game's original name of Rogue was based around our protagonist, represented initially with an @ symbol. Now before Rogue, there was in fact another game with similar characteristics, called Beneath Apple Manor, released in 1978 for the Apple II. But Apple-like. It just sounds like a small child proclaiming his dietary preference, doesn't it? And so we'll just brush that aside for a second. Early on, throughout the 80s, 90s and even noughties, the roguelike was quite a niche genre, a gaming style reserved for those in the know. Other games would copy the roguelike formula, such as Hack, which introduced shop elements, and the expansive NetHack. These early titles would stick to the tried and tested imagination-inducing premise, and a group of hardcore fanatics would emerge, all sharing source code and tweaking their own variations on the formula. It's not really until titles like Spelunky and Rogue Legacy came along in the recent past, however, that the roguelike genre became something larger. Now it's also arguable that since that happened, the actual formula that made a roguelike has also been taken away from the genre. If you look at games like Spelunky or Rogue Legacy, you'll find that really the only thing carried through is the procedurally generated level. There's some other things, I mean there are RPG elements as well, but it doesn't feel like the gritty rogue fantasy of the 80s we knew and loved. I mean, these games could easily have been chucked into the indie category and all would have been dandy, but they were not. And it's almost as if by becoming mainstream, by plugging square plugs into round holes, the original core of the roguelike is starting to become lost. Now because of this, at a roguelike development conference held in Berlin during 2008, factors were determined as to what roguelike definition means. The extensive list includes random tile-based levels, permanent death, turn-based combat, emergent gameplay, hack-and-slash action, magical items, resource management, and a mostly single-player theme. The full list of definitions seems a bit over the top in my opinion, and to most gamers it's not hard to see if a game is a roguelike or actually rogue-unlike. So we arrive at a place where there are now two views. We have the view that these newer games, these square plugs, aren't roguelikes at all. They're close, but they miss key elements and the feel of the original, and thus, no cigar. On the other hand, we have the view that the roguelike genre has simply expanded. and taken on new horizons as technology and game development have grown. Whichever view you fall on, it's clear that there are lots of games which now fall into the roguelike category, but which don't really look or feel like the game which started it. Rogue. Or possibly beneath Apple Mallet.